Don't touch that velvet box, Lucia. Then look at it properly. The aigrette was here. Are you saying I took it? I'm saying it didn't walk away on its own. The air in Lady Waverley's dressing room smelled of face powder, candle wax, and fresh lilies. And in the middle of all that perfume, fear arrived first. Lucia stood very still, white gloves folded in her hands, while the estate steward bent over the open jewel case with the calm of a man who already knew which way the room would turn. Mr. Pritchard did not raise his voice. Men like him rarely needed to. He just glanced once toward the door, once toward the wardrobe, and let silence do the ugly work for him. Until that night, she had been the kind of woman grand houses depend on and barely see. She knew which silver needed the soft cloth, which guest hated cold tea, which hallway board creaked before dawn. The fire in the morning room, the folded napkins, the polished banister that caught the lamplight like honey, all of it passed through her hands. A live-in estate housekeeper scapegoated for a theft she did not commit does not begin as a scandal. She begins as order itself. But that evening, one missing heirloom turned years of faithful work into suspicion. Lady Waverley's lips trembled. Sir Rowland's jaw set hard. And when Nora, the youngest maid, whispered, "Miss Lucia would never do that," Mr. Pritchard answered without even looking at her, "Search the housekeeper's room." That was the moment the floor shifted under everyone's feet. Because some doors, once opened in disgrace, do not close quietly. If you want to stay with Lucia through what came after that search, subscribe and keep listening. Before that search ever happened, Lucia's days had their own quiet rhythm. She was always up before the rest of the house, when the kitchen still held the sleepy smell of coal heat and yesterday's bread. She checked the pantry keys, counted the linen bundles, ran a finger along mantel shelves no guest would ever inspect, and listened for the small sounds that told her whether the house was settling well or slipping out of order. A rattling window latch, a lazy boiler, a footman late to his post. Good household staff know that trouble rarely arrives shouting. Most days, it begins as something slightly off. Lucia had earned her place the hard way. She earned it with spotless inventories, polished silver, and the kind of memory that held every guest allergy, every cracked saucer, every missing cuff button. Lady Waverley liked perfection, without noise. Sir Rowland liked efficiency, without excuses, and she gave them both. Nora, still young enough to blush when corrected, followed Lucia from room to room with dusting cloths tucked into her apron pocket. She watched her the way girls watch women who seem unbreakable. "How do you remember all this?" she asked once in the still room, where lemon oil and starch hung in the air. Lucia smiled faintly. "You don't remember a house with your head, you remember it with your hands." Only one person in that world seemed to dislike how naturally she held it together. Mr. Pritchard. The estate steward was always smooth, always proper, always one step too ready to remind everyone who truly answered to the family. And 3 days before the dinner, Lucia saw him make a change in the jewelry ledger, after she had already balanced it. That small change stayed with Lucia all through the next days, the way a splinter stays under the skin even when you keep working. The estate was full of movement by then. Florists came in, carrying damp green stems that smelled of cold water and cut leaves. In the kitchen, trays clattered, butter warmed, stock simmered, and cooks snapped at one another over timing. Footmen crossed the back corridor with pressed jackets over their arms. Every clock in the house seemed louder than usual. A dinner like that did not happen by accident. It was stitched together by hands that never appeared in the photographs. Lucia moved through it all with her notebook and steady voice. She corrected table placements, changed a guest card with a blot of ink, sent Nora upstairs with fresh hand towels, then went herself to the dressing room to check the jewel tray before Lady Waverley began to dress. The aigrette was there then, pale stones catching the lamp glow like frozen drops of rain. She noted it, closed the case, and turned the key. Later, just as twilight flattened itself against the windows, Nora came hurrying into the service pantry, cheeks pink, breath short. "Miss Lucia, I saw Mr. Pritchard near her ladyship's rooms again." Lucia looked up from the folded menu cards. "Did he say why?" Nora shook her head. "No, miss. Only he looked startled when he saw me." That was not proof. It was not even an accusation. In houses like that, many truths arrive dressed as small details no one wants to pick up. So Lucia said nothing. She only smoothed the cards, washed her hands, and went back upstairs. And when she opened the dressing room door again, Lady Waverly was standing there, white-faced, beside the empty case. From there, everything moved with the cold speed of people protecting themselves. Lady Waverly pressed one hand against her throat as if she were the injured one. Sir Rowland shut the dressing room door before the guests in the hall could notice anything was wrong. Lucia stood beside the vanity, the scent of lilies now soured by panic, and said the only thing a truthful person can say when truth suddenly sounds weak. "I locked the case. I opened nothing after that." Mr. Pritchard answered at once, too quickly. He suggested a quiet search of the upstairs rooms, for the dignity of the house. That is how injustice often enters dressed in manners, not with shouting, but with polished words and lowered voices. Nora stepped closer to Lucia, pale as starch. "She didn't take it," she said. "I know she didn't." No one thanked the girl for courage. The search began with drawers, wardrobes, hat boxes, trunks. Silk rustled. Hangers clicked. The footman avoided Lucia's eyes. A maid from the laundry stood frozen in the doorway, with pillowcases still warm from the press. When they reached Lucia's room, the air there felt plain and honest. Lavender soap, folded uniforms, a small prayer card by the mirror. She watched Mr. Pritchard move straight to the lower wardrobe shelf, as if he had been there before. Then he bent, reached behind a stack of aprons, and lifted out a velvet pouch. Inside was not the aigrette itself, but the empty jewel case lining, the one Lady Waverly recognized at once by the torn satin corner. Nora gasped. Sir Rowland's face hardened. And Lucia, who had spent years keeping other people's order, understood in one dreadful second that she was being arranged. She was being arranged. After that, the room lost whatever mercy it still had. Lucia spoke clearly. She said the pouch was not hers. She said Mr. Pritchard had no right to touch her things before anyone else entered. She said the jewel ledger had been altered. But truth, when it comes from the wrong mouth, can sound like insolence to people who have already chosen comfort over fairness. Sir Rowland did not ask to see the ledger. Lady Waverly did not ask why the case lining had appeared without the aigrette itself. They looked at the velvet pouch, then at Lucia, and the judgment settled like dust. Nora tried once more. Her voice shook, but she spoke. "He went into her room before us. I saw him in the corridor upstairs." That was enough to turn Mr. Pritchard's polished face cold. He did not argue with the girl. He only said, "Then Nora is no longer fit for service either." One sentence, and just like that, the youngest maid was dismissed for defending the woman who had trained her. Lucia felt something inside her go still. Broken was different. Broken people beg. Still people understand the shape of a door closing. When Sir Rowland told her she would leave by the service entrance at once, without a written reference until matters were clarified, she knew what that meant. In that world, no paper meant no future. A good name could take years to build, and one accusation from the right person could bury it before midnight. She packed under watch, 2 dresses, her shoes, a brush, her housekeeping notebook. And when she stepped out into the damp night air, Nora came running after her, with tears on her cheeks and a folded scrap of paper in her hand. Lucía took the paper with cold fingers. Rain had started by then, a thin, mean rain that darkened the gravel and soaked the hem of her skirt before she reached the outer gate. Nora, still crying, pressed the scrap into her palm and whispered, "My aunt has a room. It's small, but she's decent. Please go there." Behind them, the service door shut with that heavy old house sound that says more than words ever do. One life closing, another not yet begun. Evelyn's house stood over a narrow grocery with steamed-up windows and a bell that rang every time the front door opened downstairs. Her spare room smelled of clean blankets, starch, and a little bit of mothballs. A bed, a washstand, and a lamp with a crooked shade. Nothing grand, polished, or hidden. To a woman thrown out in disgrace, it felt almost holy. Evelyn herself was sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and plain in the way honest people often are. She listened while Lucía spoke, one piece at a time, without interruption and without that false pity some people wear like a hat. When the story was done, she set down her teacup and asked the question that mattered. "Did they give you your written reference?" Lucía shook her head. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "Then they didn't only turn you out. They aimed to make sure no good house would take you in again." That was the real cruelty. The suitcase, the rain, even the shame. It was the invisible hand reaching ahead of her, closing doors she had not knocked on yet. The next morning, Lucía put on her plainest dress, pinned back her hair, and went to ask for work anyway, only to hear the same sentence before noon at the third house. By the third rejection, Lucía could tell how the sentence would sound before it was spoken. One house smelled of beeswax and roses, another of boiled cabbage and old rugs, another of expensive soap and closed windows. The words changed a little, but not enough to matter. "We need someone with stronger references. The position has been filled. We can't take a risk." No one said thief to her face. People with soft chairs and good curtains rarely use the ugliest word when a polite one can wound just as well. So she stopped asking for live-in posts and took whatever came. Day cleaning, laundry mending, pantry sorting, silver polishing after family dinners where she was not allowed to use the front steps. Her hands kept working. Her pride had no such easy employment. At night, she came back to Evelyn's narrow kitchen, where onions fried in butter and the kettle rattled on the stove, and tried not to let her silence fill the room. Evelyn watched her for a week before speaking plainly. "You know what ruins decent women in this line of work?" she asked, sliding a chipped plate toward her. "Not hard labor or long hours. Vagueness. A whispered complaint. A missing spoon nobody logged. And then, gone." She tapped the table with one blunt finger. Why should all the risk belong to the worker? Lucía looked down at her tea. That question settled deeper than comfort ever could. Because she had done everything right. She had kept notes. She had counted, checked, locked, verified, and still, one powerful lie had outrun all her care. 2 days later, while helping in a townhouse kitchen, she saw a nanny accused over a missing brooch. And before anyone could dismiss the girl, Lucía noticed where the child had hidden it. The brooch was in the toy cupboard, tucked inside a wooden horse with a loose saddle. Lucía saw it because she had spent too many years learning how disorder leaves little trails behind it. The child had been playing dress-up. The nanny's apron pocket was empty. The mistress of the townhouse was already red-faced and ready to dismiss her, But Lucia reached past the blocks, lifted the toy, and heard the small metallic click inside. When she opened it, the room went quiet enough to hear the clock in the hall. The nanny started crying from relief. The mistress looked embarrassed, though not embarrassed enough. She muttered something about a misunderstanding and turned away as if the shame belonged to the servant for having frightened her. That too taught Lucia something. In houses where people are used to being obeyed, innocence is often treated as an inconvenience instead of a victory. That night, back in Evelyn's kitchen, the smell of tea and toasted bread wrapped around the room while Lucia told her what had happened. Evelyn listened, then leaned back in her chair and said, "You keep saving women from being buried by the same kind of lie that buried you." Lucia said nothing at first. She only looked at her own hands, rough now, reddened from soaps and hot water. Then she asked, slowly, "What if there were a way to hire people that didn't depend on whispers? What if every duty was written down? Every complaint, every key, every item?" Evelyn's eyes sharpened. Then decent household staff might finally have some protection. If you've ever seen how fast a bad word can ruin a working woman, stay with me here, because the next step did not begin with revenge. It began with an evening class, a sharpened pencil, and Lucia writing her name on a blank form. From that night on, Lucia's life split into two shifts. In the daytime, she worked wherever someone would have her. She scrubbed kitchen tiles until her wrists ached, pressed table linens that smelled of steam and hot cotton, sorted pantry shelves, and took the kinds of jobs people offer when they do not trust you enough to hand over keys. Then, after supper at Evelyn's little table, she changed into her best plain skirt, tucked her notebook under her arm, and went to class. The room was above a dry cleaner's shop, with humming lights, scuffed floors, and chairs that squeaked whenever anyone leaned back. There, she learned the words nobody had taught her when she first went into service: liability, documentation, grievance procedure, contract terms. Dry words, maybe, but sometimes dry words are the boards a drowning woman reaches for. Lucia copied everything down in her careful hand: how duties should be listed, how inventories should be signed by two people, how accusations should be handled before a life is ruined by rumor. She did not study to become grand. She studied so that what happened to her would stop happening so easily to others. Evelyn saw it before Lucia said it out loud. "You're not just trying to find work anymore," she murmured one evening, buttering toast while rain ticked at the window. "You're building rules." Lucia nodded. "A placement agency, but not like the others. One that protects the worker, too." A week later, Nora came by with a parcel of mended uniforms and news from the service world. People were talking, she said. Some houses were already asking whether Lucia could help place reliable staff, and one particular widow wanted to meet her in person. That meeting took place in a drawing room so over-scented with roses that it almost hid the smell of old money. Mrs. Harbury, the widow Nora had mentioned, sat upright on a pale sofa with a lapdog in her arms, and a look that suggested disappointment had been her favorite pastime for years. She did not ask Lucia to sit at first. She asked questions instead. Had she ever managed a full dining staff? Could she supervise laundry inventories? What would she do if a maid broke china and lied? Lucia answered each one without hurry, with order. When Mrs. Harbury finally offered tea, the conversation changed. "I've used more than one placement agency," she said, stirring her cup without drinking. "They send polished girls with pretty smiles and no backbone, or capable women with no proof of character. I am tired of gambling in my own house." Lucia felt the old wound stir, but this time it did not weaken her. It sharpened her. She told the widow what she was building: Signed duties, key logs, trial periods, written protections for employers and servants alike, and one simple rule that mattered more than all the rest. No one would be condemned over a missing item without a proper review. Mrs. Harbury listened more carefully then. Ambitious, she said at last, and expensive to run. Cheaper than a false accusation, Lucía replied. That answer hung in the room. Even the little dog stopped panting. By the end of the visit, Mrs. Harbury had not smiled, but she had done something rarer. She had agreed to try Lucia's system with one senior maid and one cook. And as Lucía stepped back into the cold afternoon, clutching her notes against her coat, she saw a familiar figure waiting across the street under a dark umbrella. Nora, breathless, waving her over with urgent news from the old estate. Nora hurried Lucía into the shelter of a shop awning, rain ticking on the canvas above them. "It's that house," she said, still catching her breath. "People are leaving. 2 kitchen maids in 1 month, a valet last week, and a new cook who lasted 4 days." Lucía said nothing at first. She only listened. Nora lowered her voice. "They say no one trusts anyone there now. Cupboards are checked twice. Keys keep changing hands. And Mr. Pritchard blames the staff for everything." Lucía felt no pleasure in hearing it. Pain does not become holy just because it visits the people who once ignored yours. But she did feel something steadier, confirmation. A house run on fear always starts eating itself. That was the lesson she carried into every meeting after that. Mrs. Harbury's trial placement went well. Then another family called. Then another. A cook recommended her to a widower with a difficult mother. A nursery maid sent her cousin. Evelyn's dining table disappeared beneath files, key logs, duty sheets, and little stacks of typed agreements. Lucía stopped chasing work and began shaping it. In time, she gave the business a proper name and a small office of its own, where polished floors and plain rules lived side by side. Nora joined her there, first part-time, then fully, helping interview applicants, checking references, and reminding nervous girls to sit up straight and speak clearly. The thing grew because it solved a wound people knew too well, even when they were ashamed to name it. Then, one gray morning, years later, while Lucía was reviewing contracts, the office phone rang. A jeweler was on the line, asking whether she had once worked at Waverly Estate and whether she remembered a missing aigrette. The jeweler's voice was careful, the way people sound when they know one sentence may reopen an old wound. He explained that a damaged clasp from a formal hair ornament had surfaced with a pawn ticket attached to it. The piece had been altered and sold off in parts years earlier, but the paperwork had finally caught up with the lie. A name connected to the sale led to a cousin of Mr. Pritchard. From there, other things began to loosen. A silver frame once marked misplaced, cufflinks never recovered, cash discrepancies that had been waved away because no one wanted scandal under a grand roof. Lucía sat very still at her desk, one hand resting on the neat stack of contracts she had built her life around. Nora stopped sorting files. Evelyn, visiting that morning with a paper sack of warm rolls, lowered herself slowly into the chair by the window. No one spoke for a moment. The office smelled of coffee, ink, and rain drying on wool coats. Then the jeweler asked if Lucía would provide a statement about the night of the missing aigrette. She did. From precision, she gave dates, room routines, the altered ledger, the search, the empty case lining, and the fact that the estate steward had touched her room before anyone else. Years ago, her truth had sounded too small against his confidence. Now it had records beside it. That is one of life's stern lessons. Honesty should live in the heart, yes, but in this world, it also helps to keep paper. By afternoon, whispers had already started moving through the service world. And just before closing time, Sir Roland's office sent a message asking whether Lucia would come to the estate, privately and as soon as possible. She did not go to the estate that same hour. Lucia finished the day first. She signed 2 contracts, answered a question from a nervous applicant, and locked the office ledger with steady hands. Only then did she change into her dark coat and travel back to the house that had once sent her out through the service gate. Evening had already lowered over the grounds. The gravel was damp. The stone steps looked smaller than she remembered. Funny how places shrink once they no longer own your fear. Inside, the change was worse. Neglect, a smudge on the entry mirror, faded flowers in the front hall, dust at the edge of a stair runner. Small things, but Lucia noticed them all. Houses speak through details, and this one was tired. Sir Roland met her in the library, older now, the stiffness in him no longer proud, but worn. Lady Waverley came in after, pale and thinner, carrying shame like a shawl she could not set down. They did not waste much time. The pawn ticket had opened everything. Mr. Pritchard had vanished. Other thefts were being traced. Her name, they said, would be formally cleared. A written reference would be issued. Public notice would follow. Then came the real reason for the meeting. Staff had been leaving for months. The estate had guests coming, obligations ahead, and no one capable of restoring order. They wanted help. Not forgiveness or friendship. Help. Lucia listened without rescuing them from their discomfort. Then she opened her folder and spoke as the head of her own business. Terms. Staffing fees. Signed protections. No private room searches. No whispered dismissals. No accusations without review. If they wanted workers through her, they would take them as any other client would. Sir Roland agreed faster than pride should have allowed. And then Lady Waverley, voice barely above a whisper, asked the one question that changed the air in the room. Would Lucia herself come back and run the house? Lucia did not let the silence drag on out of cruelty. She answered plainly. "No," she said. "I won't return as your housekeeper." Lady Waverley lowered her eyes. Sir Roland said nothing. Then Lucia placed one sheet from her folder on the table between them. "But I will take this estate as a client, under the same terms as every other house. Signed duties, signed inventories, no private searches, no dismissal without review. And one more thing." She turned the page. "Your new head housekeeper will be Nora." For the first time that evening, Lady Waverley looked up in surprise. Nora, the young maid they had once thrown away for speaking one honest sentence, was now the woman Lucia trusted to restore the place. She had grown into herself by then. Steady voice, clear eye, no trembling left in her hands. When Lucia told her the next day, Nora cried in the office, laughed through the tears, and said, "You really think I can run that whole house?" Lucia smiled. "I think you already know how to protect one." The formal clearing came soon after. A letter was issued. Notices moved through the service world. Her name, once passed around like a warning, was now spoken with respect. But by then, the paper mattered less than the life standing in front of her. The old estate needed her standards more than she had ever needed its approval. Some stains never come out of velvet, but clean linen, folded right and stored dry, can serve a house for years. That was the difference. One thing hid damage, the other was built to withstand use. A few weeks later, Lucia stood in the front hall while Nora directed footmen, checked flowers, and sent a tray back because the glasses were spotted. The house sounded different already, not afraid, just awake. Outside, the evening air smelled of rain on stone. Lucia buttoned her coat, stepped down the stairs and left by the front door this time, with her keys in her own pocket. If this story stayed with you, leave a word in the comments for the women who keep whole houses standing. And if you'd like more stories like this, stay close to the channel.